Now it is my pleasure to introduce our main speaker tonight, Joey J. from Weatherford, Texas, by way of Trenton, New Jersey.
Thanks for having me here tonight. My name's Joe. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic. 41 years ago, and April 8th, 1985, at the Crossroads Club in Delray Beach, Florida, I said that way, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since. I'm not sure where this deal is going to go here tonight, and it's a long time to talk about, myself. So I thought I'd maybe just start with today, because 67 years old, so some of the story I forget. But I do remember this morning, and I opened my eyes, and like I really try to do every morning, and it wasn't always this way, so now we're talking about how does like a 67-year-old guy who's sober 41 years start his day? It was very different than how I started it when I was 26 and sober a day or a week or a month or on. So this is what it looked like this morning. I opened my eyes and I try to lay there for a second, and just kind of collect my thoughts. I try to pause for a minute before I get moving. I go on YouTube, and I do a 10-minute meditation, and in that meditation, I catch those thoughts coming in. Like, why did I say that yesterday? What the heck am I going to do tonight? And talk for 55 minutes about myself? It's ridiculous. And so it's this thing, but it talks to me in my own voice, and it takes me away from feeling good. But that's the first voice I have in the morning. And so spending that time kind of, for me, just trying to feel God, feel what could God look like? What may this be like? How is my day going to go? Thought comes in, please let the thought go out. Because that's going to help me later in the day when that voice, is talking to me. I walk in here and I go, what am I going to say? What do the people think of me? Then my day gets moving along, and it comes back, and we're getting ready to come here, and there was an issue with our travel deal, and so I'm with sober friends, so I have to act against my nature, because my nature was, when things went wrong, to lean into it, because but I'm with a bunch of sober guys, and showing that part of me, that my nature, my first inclination is not to act like I've learned over all this time using these steps. But because I started my day off with that little bit, that 10 minutes, and so now I know that not to trust that thought. Even though it comes in my voice, I know to let it go, because I practice that a little bit in the morning, and then we go on, and then we're getting ready to leave, and I'm like, should I wear my cowboy hat? Like, what would they think? I'm really glad I did, because it helps with the lights. So I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave it out, and then if Drew wears his, I'm going to wear mine. And so I go along, and then I get a text, Drew, are you going to wear your cowboy hat? I say, oh, thank God. I get on the phone, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Which is funny, because Barney's a horse trainer. He's a cowboy. So that's how the world works. And then I'm here tonight. If I can, I'd really like to leave, as many of you as I can today with a talk that is the practical application of this thing in day-to-day life. Ham and eggs, digging ditches, just doing the steps and doing what they recommend in the meetings and in the book, and what the original 100 people came up with. And this unbelievable incredible adventure of life happens that I could have never imagined in my wildest dreams. Alcohol for me, I was a problem waiting to happen. I was uncomfortable in my own skin. I never really felt like I fit in. And then one day when I was, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old, my parents were having a party. There was a blender. There was something sweet and sour in it, and it burned going down, and I was never going back to the way I felt before I felt like that. I made an ass of myself. I fell in love. I got my heart broke. I threw up. I could have, and that could have been the end. I couldn't wait to do it again because any of that stuff was worth how I felt. Like, that was a small price to pay for not feeling how I felt before I discovered that. And drugs had to be better. So I went off on whatever I could find, whenever I could find it, I took it. And in the beginning, the consequences were pretty much what I had in that first instance, and I've kind of figured out how to manipulate, lie my way through them, make believe they didn't happen, and just kind of like go on. School was better if I could drink at the bus stop. Somebody would steal liquor from their parents, and we drink it before the bus, and whatever else we were doing, and under the bridge. And I felt like I could do this deal, this life deal. I could show up. I could have interpersonal relationships. I didn't know all that was going on, but I felt like getting up in the morning. I felt like doing things, and there's this thing that I learned later on called progression. I had no idea that that's what was happening to me, but I was using more. I was drinking more, and the consequences were starting to ramp up. The concept of not drinking or drugging was completely off the table. So you had a whole bunch of other things that I had to kind of start to figure out on how I was going to be able to continue drinking and drugging and manage the things that were now starting to happen to me. So I started to switch stuff around. And there was this short period of time in my early teens, I don't know, I mean, it was 15 or so, that the LSD seemed like a really good answer. And it might have worked if I just did it a little bit, but that just never worked. I would start that way, and then the thing would get away from me. And so I ended up, in a straitjacket. They took my shoelaces. They pumped me full of Thorazine. They sent me home. And I was like, maybe something was wrong with that. I'll try one more time just to see, and that didn't end well either. So I was like, you know what? I think maybe that one we should rule out. My problem with alcohol was I made such a complete ass of myself so quickly that we needed to prolong this thing. And there was some of the girls we hung out in the neighborhood. They had found a doctor, and he gave them amphetamines, and so we ended up like this whole neighborhood full of kids that were this thin, and I could drink like I wanted to. It was great. It was fantastic. I could drink and drink and drink and drink, and if I managed the pills correctly, by the time I made a complete ass of myself, we'd gone, I had at least a full night of being out before, the brakes got slammed on. And like this whole thing of mine and this disease, whatever I was trying to do was not going to work. I didn't know that. There was no way I was going to let go of and feel the way I had before I discovered this stuff. The consequences started to get big, and the whole amphetamine and Jack Daniels thing came to a kind of a crashing end. And I didn't have a driver's license, but I totaled the car, and a couple driving home from a party were going down the street that I happened to be laying in the middle of, and they almost hit me. They were first responders on their way home from a party, and my ribs had gone through my lungs, and I was drowning. And one stayed with me, and the other one went and got an ambulance. So the whole, hospital last rites thing. And I came out of the hospital, and now, like, fear was kind of coming into this deal, and the only way I really knew how to deal with fear, because I didn't have a higher power, I didn't have steps, I didn't know any of this stuff, was a headlong assault powered by the unaided will, which works not well either. And so a week out of the hospital, I totaled the other family car, and I hadn't even got a driver's license yet. So, my father said that he had found a school in Maine, and because he couldn't find one in Alaska, and they shipped me up, and so I graduated from high school with a dislocated shoulder, 2 black eyes, a broken nose, a concussion, and it would have been called a mugging, but I started it. So it was like, well, how am I going to do this thing? And I kind of started to try to manage alcohol, which is, that whole thing that's a lot of brain damage. And I'd have it for a little while, and then something would happen, and there'd be some consequences, and I'd kind of get the thing figured out a little bit, and I could get on, and I got into a college, and I discovered cocaine, and the story ends pretty quick after that, right? There's no way to wake up after a 4-day run and not feel like a total degenerate. Like there's not even like a story that I could have concocted, and I had gotten good at stories and cover-ups, and I was just like a degenerate. And April 8th, 1985, I walked into the Crossroads Club in Delray Beach, Florida. I had been in and out of the rooms for about 3 years, and the progression thing was happening. And I finally walked in and I was just like whatever you're going to do. The guys I avoided, like Patrick, I started to follow. And I'm just like, what do you do? And so one of them gave me a job, and I just followed this thing. Nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what I thought the world might have thought of me at that point. I remember, which it's amazing how crazy we can make our family, like absolutely insane. Because they were like, "Do you really need to go to those meetings?" I'm like, how could you even ask that question? I was like, I'm the guy that like totaled your cars before I had a driver's license. I'm like, I'm a total train wreck, and you're asking me if I should really go to these AA meetings. Something happened when I finally surrendered that it didn't matter what anybody. I'm just going to these meetings and I'm following you guys. When I saw the first step, I was like, wow, that is exactly how I felt. The second one, the third one, the God thing, and then there's homework and the rest of it, like I wasn't quite sure, but I did not want to go the way I was feeling. So I just kept coming back, and I just kept coming back and coming back, and did step one, then step 2, then step 3, and then I started to feel good, so I had a sponsor, and then finally one day he gave me the 4th step tape for the blind in front of all my AA buddies. Because I had like a stack of every one of the pamphlets that he had gotten me to see if, when you're going to do your 4th step. I just went home that night, I pulled the one off the top, and I just did it. Something happened for me in that moment where like I never really belonged anywhere. Like I wasn't a team sport player. I wasn't a Boy Scout. I didn't belong anywhere. I did the 4th step and then the 5th step, and I felt like I belonged here. like I was like, okay, like maybe this is my spot. Maybe you're my people. Maybe this is where I belong. You know, I can do this deal. And I really dug in for years. And it's physical, emotional, and spiritual. Look, the spiritual thing has morphed and changed over the course of my whole adult life, and that we have 55 minutes. I got to kill a lot of time, so we'll talk about that as we go along. But I understood the physical and the emotional. So if I exercised and I went to AA meetings and I went to work and I prayed, which you guys told me to pray or I'd use, so I prayed. And I had this very, very Spartan life for a bunch of years. And, you know, all the stuff happens, right? We feel better, we look better. The stuff we interact with, we're better at. My career started to, you know, to climb. And at about 10 years, it wasn't enough. You know, like I just had this kind of empty feeling, and a sponsee's younger brother went to a treatment center, and the mother took him, and she came back, and she said, they got this thing for people like you with time that it's called a renewal. And so I checked myself back into rehab with 10 years, and I did a week in this renewal program, and they had they asked me why I went there. I said, I came here for a spiritual awakening. And they said, great. So they had like a Buddhist monk. She was really cool. They had a Native American shaman. They had like a Bible Belton, you know, Christian guy. They had a rabbi. And you got to spend time with each one. And so I went to the one, this is sort of Bible Belton guy. And he's like, why are you here? I said, I think I really need a spiritual awakening. He's like, where do you live? At the time, I was on like 68th Street in Central Park West in Manhattan. And he goes, wow, you came out to Minnesota for a spiritual awakening. I'm like, yeah, I think that's what I need. He goes, you know, Bill saw the light in the sanitarium like a block from where you live. I was like, I didn't know that. He goes, he's like, you could have just gone to the park bench. And so, you know, I kind of left there with, the spiritual thing needs work. Check. And I came back, and you know what? There's this thing, this willingness thing, and we were all talking about it earlier tonight. Like, where does that come from? Because like I didn't have like the big I had the willingness. I did not want to go back to the way life was before I found this. I absolutely did not want to go back to the way I felt before I found drugs and alcohol. So all I had was this stuff to work on. And, you know, I started to have a lot of fun in sobriety. I had a bunch of sober buddies. We'd meet up after work. We'd have dinner. We'd go to a meeting. I was in a really good routine. And then, you know, I got success in my career. And that felt even better than some of the other work I was doing. So like, let's do a little more of that. And then it got better, and that felt even better. And so I did a little bit less of the thing that got me there. And at 20 years, the phenomenon of craving returned. And that is terrifying. It was also the period of my life I refer to the couple of years of the scary acronyms: DOJ, FBI, AUSA, you know. And then you know what I did? I got really serious about my program, and I worked really hard on my spirituality because I needed something to make me feel better, because now I was really scared. And, you know, I woke up my wife, Shannon, God bless her. She was sober and like a ride or die chick. And I woke her up, and you know, I said, my sponsor told me to wake her up and tell her what was going on, so I told her. And he told me to call my business partners and tell them I couldn't come to work because I needed to become a newcomer again in AA. Thank God one of them's my brother. So he's like, he got it. He knew the whole other story. So he's like, go do whatever you got to do. And I became a newcomer again. And you know what? Everything worked out the way it was supposed to work out. And it's part of my story and part of my past. And I don't wish to close the door on any of it. My prayers were like, you know, God, one more time, please. I'm like really sorry. Like I will not take this thing for granted again. You know, please, just take this away one more time. Because what was going on in my life at the time, when it came back, and the way this thing came back was, I hadn't slept in a while. I had a lot of things to worry about. And in the middle of the night, I thought, you know, if I could just sleep, if I could just get a good night's sleep. And I'm thinking, these kids that are nodding out in the meetings, whatever the hell they're taking, maybe if I just took like a half of one, I could be able to sleep. And then I'm like, where would you find one? And it came back. And you know, that first week, years of that Spartan life of living this thing just the way you told me to do it, what I didn't know I was doing at that time was I was training my feet so that my feet knew what to do, because I was now in real trouble. And my feet took me to call my sponsor. My feet had me wake up my wife, wake up Shannon, and become a newcomer again. So I was going to Perry Street in New York 3 times a day, mopping floors, doing and somewhere like 2 weeks into it, it left. I no longer walked by a bar and remembered what it smelled like. I no longer saw a commercial and remembered what the beer tastes like. I no longer knew where every single drug dealer and working girl was on what corner, because that had all come back when the phenomenon of craving returned. That all went back away. And I moved out of the city. My brother and I ended up with a family farm, and I have not taken this thing for granted since then. I got a buddy of mine, and he's not one of us, but he's a really devoutly religious guy. And he said, you know, he's come to meetings with me, and he said, you know that that thing when you guys talk about willingness, he says, I think about it a lot, and he goes, I think that's a miracle. And you know, you throw miracle, we're a miracle, this thing's a miracle, that's a miracle. But in that moment I thought about it, I said, what if it is? What if that unwilling me that became willing, what if that really was a miracle? It changed how I treat this thing. It changed how I behave when it comes to this sobriety, this program, this gift that we've gotten. And in defense of a 20 or 30-year-old moron, I didn't do it because I was like 20 or 30. I was early in the, it changed and having the phenomenon of craving return gave me a whole new perspective on follow direction. So, that next course of my life really changed. 10 years later, Shannon drank and left. And she went on God bless her. She was a project, she was a project kid, and so she drank, and she got something she had always really, really wanted, which was total freedom, a big check, and she could do whatever she wanted, and she went on a hell of a roll. I went to my home group and set up chairs, which when the person you love is flying all over, she's in Dubai, she's over here, she's in Vegas, she's doing this whole deal, and I'm setting up chairs at Fog Lifters in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is near the farm I was living on at the time. And you know, it wasn't a question. It wasn't like, should I go set up chairs and just go to a meeting every day? Because again, my feet knew what to do. Because I never fell out of this herd of you guys. And, you know, like all great runs end. And, yeah. Yep. That was always hard, you know? So, you know, she hung herself, you know. And the thing that it said was the note, because there was nobody to call, so when they found her, they called me, like, and I think I was husband 3, and there was maybe a 4 and 5 in the middle of the run, like she had been on like this, you know, great run. There was nobody else to call, so they called me, and there was no family, and we couldn't get her body. So, kid she went through group homes with, still a friend of mine, and he found a family member, and we traded that guy a Range Rover so he would sign her body over. So like my life was incredible, and I just didn't drink, and I set up chairs, and you know, Shannon's ended completely alone, completely broke, where strangers found her. And that's how this deal works, right? So if that time in the hotel in Canada when I was, I don't know, sober 6, 8 years, when I opened the mini bar and I called the concierge and said, take this out of my room instead of drinking, like why didn't I drink then? You know, when the phenomenon of craving came, why didn't I go out and find, you know, one thing we're all good at, which always cracks me up when I'm sponsoring young guys and like I couldn't find a meeting. I'm like, I could take you and blindfold you, drop you off in a jungle, and you would find like booze, blow, and women. And you got this thing, you push the button and it tells you that meeting's across the street. So that one always gets me. Now I completely lost my place. You know, I went to a meeting instead of picking up. And staying in this group and sharing what's going on. So like when Drew called and I said, you know, here's what the voice in my head was telling me, it took the power away. So my disease flourishes in the darkness. And the 4th step and the 5th step taught me to bring light to it. Because if I shine a light on it, it takes the power away from it. If I leave it alone inside me, it festers and grows and it gets power. And it will eventually get more power than I have the ability to restrain it. And if this thing is progressive, and I knew where I left off a long time ago, God only knows what this thing would look like if it came out of the bag. Right, so I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Last year, I had diagnosed myself with gastritis, so I started medicating myself with Pepto-Bismol, like all the different stuff, off-the-shelf stuff. What I didn't know was that my gallbladder head was going septic, so I'm not a doctor, so I was not successful in what I did, and so, like, I woke up, I was really, really, really uncomfortable, like in huge pain, and so I got myself to an emergency room, and they're like, you're turning yellow. Like, how long has this been going on? And I'm like, you know, a long time. So they couldn't stop the pain, and it hurt, like, hugely, so they started giving me different, you know, and they started upping it, and they're upping it, and I'm like, you know what, give me my phone. And they said, you know, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, if they're going to give you a bunch of opioids, and you need somebody, there's nothing better than like call a cowboy because they're always up. So I called Barney Mac, and he's like, you know, I said, listen, kid, they're going to load me up here. I'm going on a run, you know. He's like, well, you know, I'm kind of taken aback a little bit. You know, you've got like 40 years and I only have a year. I said, kid, why do you think I've been working with you? For you? It's for me. I said, you're my insurance policy. Get down here. And by the time they got me into the emergency room, Barney was already sitting there. He sat on me for 3 days. There's not a single person that walked in that room that didn't know I was a drug addict. The guy with the mop knew. You know? And when I was done, I was done. You know, and I went home. The first surgery I ever had I was maybe sober, I don't know, 6, 7 years, and they were getting ready to operate on me, and you know, they're like, we're going to give you something, you're going to get a little high before you fall, you know, before you pass out. And I'm like, look, high's bad. High's bad. High is bad for me. Now, I had already told my sponsor where I was going. Everybody knew what I was doing. But I'm in the room, and I feel this, like, warm breath on my ear, and it's one of the nurses, goes, call your sponsor when you wake up. And I'm like, wow. And there's been those incidents throughout my life, and you know, what's happenstance, what's higher power, what's just showing up and using good direction and the right stuff happens. I don't know the answer to any of them, but I know that as long as I've been doing this, those things happen to me. And I really have no interest in knowing if I don't do this, what it's going to look like. Before Shannon passed, but when she left, there was this moment in time where I was like, okay, I'm sober. I'm not in trouble anymore. And maybe I could have some fun with this single thing. And there was a knock on the door, and a woman I dated 14 years before had a 1-year-old, and Remy showed up. He said, you're the only safe place I've ever in my life. You know, will you take on the role as my father? And was not what I had in mind. I had a whole different plan for whatever the hell I was, 45 years old and single with plenty of means. And I had a disaffected youth who was watching me like a hawk. And Remy, she's 28 now. She's sober 8 years. She never stood a chance. Her mother used cocaine when she was pregnant with her. So Remy's whole using career lasted like a year. I failed my black belt test in Al-Anon, so I am regrettably, I've gone to Al-Anon, I try to work a program, I talk to people about it. I have completely failed. I am the AA policeman in Remy's life, and it really looks stupid. And so she says things to me now because she has program. So, you know, her thing is, I practice radical acceptance with you, Dad. Like, where did you get that? What do they teach you kids nowadays in meetings? And she does. And I'm the AA policeman. I try. And even when I don't say it, I'm thinking it. You know, did you go to a meeting? Do you have a sponsor? Are you taking care of yourself? But I believe nurture and nature, she modeled herself off of what she saw with me and my friends. And so she was kind of embedded in this life that we lead. So when it became a matter of life or death for her, she chose sobriety. And that's because, like, of all you guys, right? It wasn't just me harping on her, which I can do. But it was all the relationships she had with, you know, all of her friends, all of my friends who, you know, became her like uncles and aunts and people to complain about me too, and, you know, all that stuff. It's been just an amazing adventure. I know in my my sort of practical application on a daily basis of this program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that if I do this, which I'm doing tonight, and I did yesterday, and I don't know if I'll go to a meeting tomorrow, but the next day I attend regularly. I have a home group. I do all the stuff that you guys have told me to do. If I do that, then I have a chance of acting against my nature. Because my first reaction, 67 years old, 41 years later, my first reaction is not that. My first reaction is something different. And in order to catch that, I have to practice this the same way a dancer practices, the same way a musician practices, the same way a boxer practices, a mountain climber, a skier, whatever. You practice over and over again, so when you need it, it's second nature. So what I love to do when I have somebody I'm working with, and I always try to be careful with, I don't think we're ever helping. Helping puts me here and somebody else there. I think we're working together. We're meeting as equals on the AA campus. It doesn't matter how much time you have. What I like to do is, I'll say, look, you read step 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to do the same. And let's pick a couple of times through the course of our day that we used it. So, guy cuts me off. My first thing is not, oh, I'm powerless over this, and if I dwell on this, my life will be unmanageable. But if I pause for a second and then I do that, and I'm like, okay, if I just shut up, I'll be restored to sanity. So whatever I'm feeling is insane, because what the hell? I'm safe, I'm in my car, I've got this great life, and I don't even know what's going on with this person in front of me. And then, step 3, if there is a God, and I try to work to at least be conscious to think about that, then it all kind of the air comes out. And so the person I'm working with, I ask them to do the same thing. And then there's a pick sometimes when you don't, you're real window down and you do something stupid. And then, there's a certain amount of times that you do step 10 that you just get tired of it. It's maybe I just won't be that jerk, beforehand. I was telling the guys a story on the way here. I have a business partner of 30 years. And so we can finish each other's sentences, and when he chews, it bothers me. We've been around each other for just way too long. And he did something the other day, and I lit him up. And 3 days later, and I was right. It's a problem with justifiable anger. No, legitimately 100% right. Doesn't help justifiable anger. So I'm stewing on it, and I'm like, oh, I gotta call Jack. I pick up the phone. Then 30 years we were together. I said, listen, the other day I gotta make amends. He goes, oh, I knew you'd call. You had to do it because of your program thing. I'm like, you make this any harder, I'm gonna choke you. He goes, yeah, this happens, at least once every few years with you. I'm like, Jack, don't, please, listen, can we just let this lie right now? And it's always interesting on that whole deal, because there's the lead up to the amends, which is, I was right, they were wrong. I can even shop answers and talk to other people, and they'll tell me, if they don't, I don't talk to them again. I go talk to the other person that tells me that I'm right, and there's this whole ramp up, and then I make the amends, and it's what they say doesn't matter. It all goes away. And no matter how many times I do it, to a lesser or greater degree, that same thing happens. You see, I can't live in this vessel here on this planet without drugs and alcohol, without that. I can't. I can't ever go back to that 12, 13-year-old kid before he found that blender full of stuff. And listen, that doesn't work anymore. So I got to do this thing. And then I have it depends on what's going on. I have all these people in my life I can call. And, I'll call Patrick or I'll call Drew. I call Barney Mac, you and I, David, we talk. And it takes this thing that festers in the darkness, right? And it shines a light on it. And then it goes away and it doesn't bother me anymore. So I always wonder, like, if I do nothing, if I just sit still, I'm like one of those soapbox cars, I gravitate towards things that are not good for me, unhealthy thoughts. And, we know where that ends. And if I just push that car up a hill a little bit, which is do this work, which is talk to other people, return the sober person's phone call, go to a meeting, pause, take 10 minutes in the morning and just lay in bed and go like, what is this about? And that practice of, holy mackerel, where did that thought come from? Why is that coming in? See, because this disease talks to us in our voice. That's what makes it so dangerous. And if we're left alone, we listen to it. But if we share what's going on with another person, it's like, wow, just as it comes out, it goes, oh, but that was stupid. I'll call Patrick sometimes with, like, I got a plan. And by the time I get done talking, I'm like, wow, was that stupid? Was that really like as stupid as it sounded? Yeah, it was. Don't drink. Oh, thanks, Patrick. These tools, this work that we do it's an unbelievable adventure. I could have never imagined. I can sound pretty good on a bunch of stuff. When it comes to relationships, I sound really terrible because I've never been really good at it. And so it was last year my 8th and final engagement ended. But it sounds like a lot, but I'm 67, so it's only 2 a decade over the 40 years of sobriety, so it's not like that big a number. But so I'm done. So my brother was like, so I went to work. So he's like, why are you here? Like, what do you, like, why? Like, why? Do whatever you want. So I called up a cowboy buddy of ours, and we loaded up 10 horses, and we headed up to Crested Butte. And from Crested Butte, we went over to Carbondale, and from Carbondale, we went to Nampa, Idaho, and from Nampa, Idaho, and I just cowboyed for 6 weeks. Like, it was just it wasn't even like I ever had a dream. I never even thought about it. It was just, and then I came back and, cleaned everything up. And, I lived through, well, almost all adolescence would be from the beginning till now, but the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, now I'm in the 60s. I started, my career sober, and I'm retiring out now. And I'm trying to use this program in that too. And so I have a bunch of young people in my life who are taking over the different things that I used to do and that we used to do. And, one of them's my nephew, and I'm very open with my recovery and my sobriety and how I do things. And, I hope I'm doing it right. When I don't know, I ask them, right? Like in some of these situations, I'm supposed to be the one that knows everything, and I don't. And sometimes there's such freedom in saying I don't. And the relationships I have everything's been around this thing that we do. And the catching myself in the moment and being honest about what's going on. And sometimes it's just as simple as like, listen, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm going to try to do the right thing. And I have a history of doing the right thing, mostly. And what an amazing adventure of life this journey we have is. I can't stress enough the simplicity of that. Just pause and read one. It'll stop you from doing something stupid, and you might read a couple and get an answer that you've been looking for. It's quick. One of the things it says on, upon awakening is be quick to admit where religious people are right and make use of what they offer. And that's been an incredible gift. So my business partner, Jack, I told you about, who I yell at every once in a while, his father's a rabbi. And so, back east, he's my go-to God guy. And so I go do Shabbos with the family, which pisses off my buddy Jack because, he's supposed to be doing it, and I'm over there with his father. And I didn't even know that it was about gratitude, but what a great idea, and how to end the week then on a Friday afternoon to be with family members and do gratitude. So he's my go-to God guy there, and I was at we ride cutting horses, and so I'm always at cutting horse shows and stuff, and they do the prayer before, and I don't know, maybe like, God, it could have been like 8, 9 years ago, maybe, something like that. I heard this one guy do a prayer before one of our horse shows, and then maybe like 3 or 4 weeks later, I was at a big horse show, and up in the stands early, I get up like 4 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, I'm there, it's really early, and there's a group of cowboys up there. There's a lectern, and this guy with a guitar, and I'm sitting there by myself on my 3rd cup of coffee, looking for somebody to talk to, and I was like, maybe I'll go over there and listen. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I think this could be where Jesus has a gun and he's angry. And then I'm like, be quick to admit where religious people are right and make use of what they offer. And so I went over, and they're some of my dearest friends now. And they kind of carved out a space for the AA guy, because in some of their deals, some of the people they know don't make it doing it their way. And so we're close enough, and we've been around each other enough, they'll, send them, our way. And so I've been thinking a lot about the God thing, and where does it fit and how does it work? And I don't have any great answers on it. I do know this, that I feel better. Now, this is not how I acted when I was 27 years old and sober 2 years. But kind of where I'm at now, I find that when I'm around people who are seeking some type of spiritual connection, when I'm around people who are seeking whatever it is or however it is their relationship with God, that I feel comfortable around them. And it has me think about my journey with that. And, that's probably the place I would leave this thing, which is I'm at that spot in my life, in my sobriety, where I'm starting to think about that piece. And, Bill and Dr. Bob and like those people were all kind of thinking around this thing. I know that when I'm thinking about my higher power, about God, when I'm with people who are talking about and thinking about it, whether it's doing Shabbos with, my buddy's rabbi father, or with my old Bible Belton preacher, Joe Howard Cowboy, I'm not thinking about all the other stuff, and that voice in my head, I don't really hear it. But if I'm left alone, it starts. And if I leave it alone, it gets louder. And if I leave it in the dark, it will eventually convince me to do something that will eventually lead me to drugs and alcohol. And I really don't want to go down that path again. So how am I doing? Good? Close enough? I got nothing else to give. That's it. Hey, thanks for having me.